Hey everybody, I'm Jon Taylor. I'm a clinical social worker. My practice is just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah. And in the work that I do with couples recovering from addiction and infidelity, addicts who are recovering from addiction and infidelity, and folks who suffer with trauma, I think there's a lot of skills that we can start using very, very early on in recovery that can make our relationships better. And the reason why I believe strongly in that is because better relationships make for a better recovery. And so those are the kind of skills that we talk about, the things that you can leave the webinar today and you can implement something new to improve your relationships. So today's topic, this is in the we're doing a series on conflict in relationships and how conflict is handled. And today we're going to talk about compromise. And this is something not too long ago I did a webinar on. We did the compromise donut, which is a skill to take home. So that's something people can find on YouTube, right, Tammy?
Yes, yeah. All of these are available, first of all, on sex and relationship healing. There's previous webinars, so the most recent ones will show there, and then ultimately they are on YouTube. But yeah, you can search for Jon Taylor, and we try to add keywords, although we started doing that more recently. So, but I think with that one I did add it. So, and I've referred to it like 8 times because it's like so helpful, and I get the donut,
If I get a chance by the end of this, I'll look up the date that I actually did that on, so that can help you narrow it down. So we're not going to focus on the how to compromise, since I've already covered that, and you can look that up. We're going to focus on kind of setting the stage for effective compromise in a relationship. So I think this is a really, really important relationship skill because much to most of our chagrin, none of us really know the best way to do anything or to do everything. And certainly when it comes to people that we want to be close to, have a good relationship with, we can't have a one-sided relationship, meaning either we or they can't set the total agenda for the relationship. We really have to come together and figure out what is going to work best for the two of us. And compromise is not the result, it's the process by which we come to what's the best for the two of us. So as in with most things in recovery, as I was thinking through how to approach compromise in a different way, it really struck me that if we're going to engage in anything that's going to be hard in a change process or a skill that doesn't come to us naturally, it's really, really important to have our why very, very clear. Because what a clear why does is it gets us back on track when things get derailed. And for me, with compromising with another person, there are so many places where that can get derailed. There may be times where my guilt about putting up a fight or my guilt about not being easy to get along with can overtake me, and I may give in when I really didn't want to give in, and there's resentment later and things like that. So knowing why we're compromising or why we're not willing to compromise, I think makes all the difference. So think back, whether you are the partner of an addicted person in recovery or an addicted person yourself in recovery, back to maybe the first moments in your recovery process, why you were confronted with the why am I going to do this? Why is this important to me? For some of us, that comes like very first in recovery. That's the thing that gets us in the rooms, on the webinars, whatever that looks like in the first place. For others of us, that may be something that comes down the road. It may be that I started doing this because my why was my partner needs support, and I'm going to find out what's going on, and I'm going to set up the perfect recovery for them, and that's why I got started. And then eventually my why changed because I recognized that I was getting support that I needed. And this was really useful for me, and there was hurt that I was carrying around and healing that I needed to do. So the why really organizes the work that we're willing to do and the work that we're not willing to do. So in the chat, I want to see if we can collect some ideas. Let's first start in favor of compromise. What are some of the reasons why you all might be willing to compromise in an important relationship? Whether that's with a spouse, whether that's with your children, a coworker, a boss, someone in your larger social community. Let's kind of get some ideas together. Why might we want to choose compromise? What are some of the reasons? see, somebody said, I want to ultimately have a good relationship without resentments. Also, I have to remember that my lens isn't always the same as everybody else's. So, for me, there's a couple of reasons to compromise. In there is, I think one of our responsibilities when we're in a relationship with somebody else is to understand where some of their resentments might be able to take root, where they might come from, and to make sure we're doing all that we can to not give legitimate reasons to resent. So um, I tend in groups, I tend to be very conscientious of the fact that I can take up a lot of time and I can take up a lot of space because I have a lot of ideas and I really like to talk, and I'm a problem solver, and I can understand that that may feel alienating, or that may feel like that doesn't leave enough room for other people. Um, so part of how I manage that is I keep a close eye on how much I talk, on whether or not what I have to say is important, or whether or not I'm taking up the group. And for me, that can represent a compromise sometimes, because there may be times where I have experience in what it is we're working on, or I have a very clear idea, or I've worked with that before. And for the sake of the group and the strengthening those relationships, it's better that I take a role as a group member than it is that I break out as a leader. So that can lead to better relationships without resentment. And also, I think there's all sorts of really good ways we can check ourselves in relationships, whether or not we're putting ourselves in that God chair, I know best. I think compromise is a really great skill to engage in, because it reminds us that there are good ideas outside of our own heads, and there are solutions to be found in paradigms and perspectives that aren't our own. Somebody else said, because I can see their side and the importance of teamwork. Sometimes when we approach a problem in a relationship, or an issue in a relationship, I think one of the most difficult things to do in the beginning is to see the other side for what it is, not what we make it out to be, or what we fear it might be. And oftentimes I think that's a really good reason to start a compromise, when we realize, hey, you do have a really good point and what you're saying is valid. So I need to accept that in. And why wouldn't we want to do that if we're putting the effort already to be in a relationship or a group of people? Why wouldn't we want to share ideas and work together to solve that? Somebody else said, this might be oversimplistic, but I would compromise when it's more important to my spouse than it is to me. I think that's a fantastic reason to engage in compromise. I got to marriage 12 years ago with a very strong no reflex. And that no it wasn't based on a certain set of principles. It was based on the fact that I could say no, and that I thought that I had really great ideas all the time. And so there were conversations that we would get into where really at the end of the day, I really didn't care what decision was made, if I was honest with myself. But I would go the rounds with my spouse, and I would essentially make her work to win the argument. And that was really destructive. That's mind game stuff. That's not a real relationship. So if we find ourselves in a conflict with somebody and we really don't care what the outcome is, or the issue's not important to us, that can be a wonderful reason to engage in compromise, simply to keep the momentum of the relationship going. Simply not to put a roadblock in where it doesn't need to be. So we've covered some really good reasons for why we might want to compromise. Let's look at now, if you want to put in the comment, same thing. What are some reasons why you wouldn't be willing to compromise on a specific issue? And I think it's important to take note, as you guys are putting these answers in that we can share. It's important to take note that this isn't a tool that necessarily works when we say, I'm always going to be open to compromise, or I'll never be open to compromise. It's very much a situation by situation thing. Because I can think of times in my own personal life, and especially the work I've done with Mother and Mesh Men, where compromise was always the default setting. And individual situations and individual merits and my feelings about individual situations were not considered. And that led to a lot of resentment and problems later on down the road. So when it comes to compromise, keep in mind that this is a situation by situation skill that we evaluate whether or not we're going to use. It's not always the right answer. So somebody said, if it's against my values, say he wanted an open relationship, and that would not be okay with me, when it is harmful or hurtful to myself or others. I think that's a really great circumstance under which not to compromise. So when it comes to values, when it comes to belief, I think that that's stuff that fundamentally changing what we value and what we believe and how we practice that, that's a very, very difficult thing. And I think very rarely in when I'm working with couples around compromise, very rarely do I suggest that anybody change how they fundamentally believe or what they fundamentally need. Sometimes we might change how that looks. I work in a very conservative religious community, and it's not uncommon that couples who come to see me, they have differences in how they want to practice their religion. And so what that might look like is we might engage in compromise around what is it going to look like when we go to church and worship together as a family? How are we going to do that in the home? But we never ever get into, maybe you need to believe the way that your spouse believes, or maybe you need to give up that truth for you in order to be on the same page with your spouse when it comes to values and beliefs. That's not really something that we can compromise easily on. Behaviors certainly are. Somebody else said, when I have a bottom line boundary and he tries to gaslight me into dropping it. I think that's a really great reason not to compromise as well. When our feeling is, if I say yes to this, or if I give in to this, then it'll just stop. He'll quit hounding me, the conflict will be gone. I think that's really shaky ground for any relationship to be on, because it's a recipe for resentment for you. And it also really reinforces persistence and not listening to no on the side of your partner. So if you know it's a bottom line, you know you're being gaslit, it's really hard for me to enter a compromise conversation with somebody when they're manipulative or coercive to get me to compromise. That's one of those that's like, if this is how we're going to do it, for me, it's an automatic no. But if someone will come to me with a reasoned argument or say, hey, I really need you to hear me out, this is important to me, I'm much more open to listening and the potential of being swayed, rather than somebody coming in with the intent to sway me, with the intent to knock me off of my feet. Somebody else said, sometimes I don't feel that I'm being understood, and that seems like that should come first before we make decisions, that we understand what the other one wants. I think that's really, really important too. Again, that would speak to me of some of us growing up, we learned to have a compromise reflex, that's the first thing we do as soon as we run into any kind of conflict or any kind of hardship. And we do that at the cost of the opportunity of being understood. So I think that's a really good reason to not compromise, or at the very least hold off on compromise. If I don't feel like you really know where I'm coming from and that you respect where I'm coming from, it may not be wise for me to engage in compromise for you, because where that's likely to go is we really don't have a compromise going. We just have a one-sided argument of why things should be this way versus that way. And compromise really is a discussion. Compromise really is a back and forth. I always, when I'm working with couples, I always say, when we get to the point where we need to negotiate and compromise, that means nobody's going to get what they want. And we have to understand that going in. That's why we call it compromise or negotiation. We're both giving up something that we may want now in order to get something that our relationship needs in the long run. So for me, compromise always comes with some sort of sacrifice, but like one of these earlier comments said, we have to be really sure what it is we're sacrificing. I'm happy to give up time. I'm happy to give up resources in most cases. I'm happy to give up some of my wants right now, but very rarely am I happy to give up a principle, a belief, a value, or my ability to say no later on in order to compromise. So while compromise can be inconvenient, I think sometimes it's the only way through a conflict. We really might be butting heads, and we might fundamentally need different things. And it's also a way, because relationships sometimes get to that that point, compromise is a way that we demonstrate our partnership and that we practice our partnership with another person. I'll really engage in this issue with you. Let's really work this through. Um, some of the most effective compromises I've seen couples work, they've taken a while to get to a point where it's like, okay, we are both okay with this, or we're both willing to pursue this path. And through the month or two that they spent talking about that issue, they learned a ton about each other. They really respected each other and their differences of opinion. They didn't end the conversation just because it was uncomfortable. They really wanted to reach up where both parties could say, all right, this is as good as it's going to get, and that's okay with me. So that is compromise for today.
It's so valuable to have the willingness. I think a little bit of it just starts with willingness, Yep. And you talked about sacrifices, and I thought, if I'm not willing to make a sacrifice to better the relationship, to make progress with the relationship, I'm going to sacrifice the relationship, because it ultimately, I don't think, can weather the storm of, the constant conflict. When you're talking about, early in your relationship with your wife, and I was like, you can win the argument and kind of like lose the battle, and not even the battle, but like at the end of the day, so my sister-in-law got my husband happy wife, happy life, and it's kind of a joke, because my husband is great to me and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's really good for me to remember that, like, that's mutual. I want us both to be elevating each other. And so, and some of my compromises are minor, like he was watching football yesterday. I don't like football, and I just didn't care. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to do my puzzle while you're doing that. But I wanted to be present in the room with him, and I wanted him to know it was okay. I really don't like football. So that really is a compromise and a sacrifice to me, in my opinion, but it's one of those things where I want, I'd been gone for a long time, so I didn't want to just go off in another room. I wanted to physically be present, even though he probably didn't even know I was in the room. But, I just find that if I'm willing to do some small things, I won't go, like if there was something major, and I've had this in relationships where, like it was an ethical issue for me, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to compromise. I don't want to sacrifice my soul, in my opinion, and give up who I am, because those little chinks in me, they take away, and I don't want to do that. So, and I don't want to ask that of anybody else either. I don't want to do anything, that I'm asking other people to go against their values, and, so I think it's compromising, but also looking at, what's going to be for the integrity of the relationship, the integrity of, both people as they're moving forward, all of that, I want to be mindful of, I guess. So, but yeah, I think it's, I like the demonstrating partnership too. It's, I'm willing to, I do want a partnership. I want a relationship. So,
Yeah.
But I thought it was really important too, when someone said, I don't feel I'm being heard, that, that's invalidating to the relationship. And if we're going to compromise, it has to be, in my opinion, from a place of willing. I really want to understand where you're coming from with all that. I want to take it all in, and not just be preparing my next argument about why you're wrong. It's like, I want to really hear that and understand that, and I can value that. Gosh, that's really important to you. I can see that, I'm still not 100% there, but, like we talked about with the donut, is there some middle ground we can, can find? So,
and as we talked about this, and especially as I really appreciate the interaction from those of you that are watching and listening. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a new client a couple months ago, and he had just turned himself in. He'd been unfaithful to his spouse, and he said, "What are some of the easiest things I can do right now to repair this?" And I just started laughing, and I felt bad that I laughed at this guy the first time I met him, but I started laughing. I said, "There's nothing easy you can do, because this is a big break in trust, and this is a big disruption to your relationship. There's a lot of really difficult things you can do over and over and over again that may be able to reset the stage for trust for your spouse, but there's nothing easy you can do." And as I look at these conflict elements that we're going to be talking about the next several weeks and have talked about the last few weeks, none of these are throwaway skills. None of these are kind of like, well, let me try this and see if it works. Like they're very specific skills, and they're very specific things we do that we have to practice. We have to get good at. If they're going to make any kind of lasting difference in our relationship. And I think the way I was introduced to compromise, it was really giving up. That's what I was taught to do, is to give up when the fight got too hard. There was no compromise in it. I may have looked that way and I may have used some of the language, but internally what I was doing was stockpiling resentment. So to really go to the table with somebody and say, let's talk this out, let's hash this out, and let's make a plan that both of us feel good about. This is a hard skill, just like your individual recoveries are hard. I would imagine when it comes down to you working a solid individual recovery, I wouldn't imagine, I know because it's been the case for me, there was no fluff in it. There wasn't just I could take or leave this part. It was really everything that I'm doing for my healing, everything I'm doing for my recovery matters. And that's why I'm doing it. It's not just time fillers. It's not just space fillers. It's something that makes a really important difference.
So I hear you saying being intentional about this too. So, because you said it takes practice, but I have to be intentional of wanting to move towards this and engage in the process. And yes, I agree, they're not throwaway skills, and they're not skills that those of us probably here naturally have. We're not natural compromisers. We're probably a little more draw a line in the sand.
Yeah, and that's really all of this rock and relationship stuff that we do. I really focus on the behavioral part of a relationship. That's why you can use it at any point in recovery. It doesn't require a ton of emotional sophistication or I've got to have my stuff figured out. It's simply a commitment to a different pattern of behavior. What we're talking about today in compromise is the change you make is getting intentional about why you would go to the bargaining table with somebody, figuring out if you want to be there or not. Because you're not doing yourself or anybody else any favors to show up to the bargaining table and not really wanting to bargain or being willing or ready to bargain. And that's okay too, if you're not. It's okay to say, I can't compromise on this one. Again, this is not a skill to be used in every relationship interaction. It's in the ones where you can.
And with the issues that you can, so it may be, well, with this relationship, there are areas I can compromise, but in this one, I'm not willing to, that's against my values, principles, whatever. I think it's situational even within a relationship. So.
Yep. And I did look through my schedule. I couldn't find the date because the webinar was not titled Compromise. I put that in another one. So just really quickly, maybe while you guys are coming up with some questions for discussion, I'm going to show the Compromise donut. It's a really simple skill. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here.
But while he's looking to do that, I'm going to invite you, if you've got questions about, compromise, or anything else, Jon is, he does a lot of disclosures. He works with couples. He does the mother enmeshed men. He's been trained to work with addiction, and specifically sex addiction and intimacy disorders. So he has a wealth of information, and I'd invite you to ask him any questions about, any relationship things that you may have been thinking about or that come to mind.
Yeah. So is this whiteboard working? Is it being shared?
Whiteboard? Yep.
Okay. So the Compromise donut looks just like a donut. We have our inner circle here and our outer circle here.
I don't see anything drawing.
Is it not showing up? This is the problem we ran into last time.
Yes, I think you just drew a donut on a piece of paper last time.
That's what I had to do,
It doesn't work. Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Well, I'll stop sharing that then. And I will draw it
on a piece of paper. So.
Let me grab a piece of paper really quick.
This is how you know these are live and not pre-planned, because it's very spontaneous.
So the Compromise donut works just like an ideal donut. We want a tiny, tiny little hole in the middle and as much donut meat as possible around the outside. Now, what the two of these things represent, the one in the middle, this represents the things that we are not willing to compromise on.
Bless you.
Thank you. The things that we can't be flexible on. So this might be our principles. This might be our values. This might be some of our core needs. Um, and so this circle is small in order to get you really, really specific about what your bottom lines are in an issue. The meat of the donut out here, these are all the parts of the issue that you're willing to be flexible on. So when I work with folks who need some negotiation or need some compromise, this is where I have them start out, because oftentimes where we try to go with compromises, we try to change each other's minds around this stuff, and that's not going to happen. So that's where I think in a lot of relationships and a lot of couples that I work with, they have these protracted discussions around things that are never going to change. When we start with, here's where I'm willing to be flexible, we find some common ground. We find some things that we may not realize. I may have misunderstood my partner when they said, I can't compromise on this. I might have felt like they can't move anywhere. But out here, I can realize, oh my gosh, there's so many ways that they're willing to be flexible. There's so many ways I'm willing to be flexible. And so that's where we start experiencing the movement towards each other again, versus setting up in our separate camps. And instead of using this is where I'm willing to meet you, we use this as the buffer. This is as far as I'm going to stay away from you. So really simple tool, way to collect some of your thoughts and maybe even start some of the compromise conversation when you might need to have it.
So if you're doing that, are you like literally writing in the donut?
Yep.
This is so, yeah, I think that's a great visual, because then it's making me think of, all the different things. And then I can bring that to the table and go, okay, here's some stuff. So
I once did that with a couple, and the wife said, my bottom lines can't all fit in the circle. She said, I need to reverse it. And just to humor her, I was like, okay, reverse it. So she filled up her outer circle with things that she couldn't compromise on. She says, I can't think of anything to put in the inner circle, the things I'm willing to be flexible on. And I said, then we're not ready to have this conversation. Like, you've got some work to do. You've got to find some flexibility here, because you're the one who said, like, we're going to need to compromise, and this looks like you're not willing to. And that was a good exercise for her to be able to see it, to actually write it down. I think it kind of takes us through what am I emotionally ready to engage with my partner, my coworker, my boss, my children on, and what is it that I still feel like I'm holding close to the chest. And that doesn't mean in every compromise we come in ready to show our full hand, but we need to be willing to show enough of the hand that we can work with. I don't know if any of you know the game Bonanza. It's a card game where you are a bean farmer and you plant fields of beans, and after so many beans you get to harvest coins. It's one of my kids. We like to play it as a family. I will not play this game with my sisters. I have 4 sisters who are very strong, intense women, and I won't play it with them because their whole approach to it is, if anything good happens to you, it can't happen to me. And so there's a lot of it's too strategic when I play it with them. We played it last night with our boys, and like with most card games we play, because they're 6 and 9, we're showing each other our hands. We're like, this is what's going on in my hand. If you see anything here, if there's a trade that you'd like to make, or, we'd say, hey, what's going on over here? People would take beans and plant them when it wasn't convenient for the other. We did each other a lot of favors, and it was a very high scoring game. And nobody was sad at the end that they lost, because we all worked together. And to me, that's the spirit of compromise, is I'm willing to show enough of my hand so that this can work, so it can stay working smoothly. Is when we get locked in that, like, this is mine and mine alone, and nobody can help me, that we really don't have grounds for much of a relationship at all.
Well, and the saying, I can be right or I can be happy. There's a little bit of it, and I don't want to ever compromise my absolute non-negotiables, like, again, if it's my principles, my values, my core beliefs, those, I don't want to ever compromise on. But everything else, it's like, how important is it? Is it worth going to the mat for, or is the relationship more important than this particular whatever it is? And I think yeah, I've done a lot of that. How important is this? Even to the, if I'm thinking about this 2 weeks from now, am I going to remember it? You know, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that I go, probably not, and then 2 months or 2 years from now, and some of the stuff is really important, and that, then I, have a different gauge for that. But a lot of stuff is just kind of like, this is just not worth
Yeah.
the emotional energy that it's going to cost me. Not to overcompromise, or like you said, well, I just gave in, and then harbor resentments. But if it's just like, this just doesn't really matter, or like someone said, this matters more to my spouse than me, okay, well, if I'm really kind of neutral on it, then whatever, but I think it's really helpful. I think it's really important, that we're, kind of sifting through things and looking at it, from that standpoint, because it's really easy, I think, to dig in and everything's important and everything,
Yep.
yeah, everything's a federal case, and it just isn't,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway.
What questions do we have?
None right now. It's not a chatty group right now. Oh, we've got one. All right. My husband tells me he resents me because he says he always gives into my demands, aka boundaries, and says he wants me to compromise to anything, but when he really wants to compromise on is for me to drop my boundaries.
Yeah, so this is a really good example of I think what a couple of people said, and the reasons not to compromise. It's against my values. I have bottom line boundaries. Compromise means that there's an area of our life that's open to discussion. And I think when it comes to a marriage, there's far more that's open to discussion between the two of you than there is when you're a single person. That's just the way that it goes. And there are still some things that are not open for discussion, and bottom line boundaries for safety, for peace of mind, those are never open for discussion. And so in a situation like this, I think it's really important to make sure that you internally stay differentiated on what's a boundary and what's control. And that you know where you're coming from, because you can get some gaslighting like this that says you never compromise anything, you never give in. And really what that's about is, I'm never going to be okay with you using porn in our house. I'm never going to be okay with you spending money in a way that's not accountable and puts us in financial hardships. Like, that's never going to be okay for me. What I would be willing to talk to you about is what it might take for us to restore a sexual relationship. Or I would be willing to talk to you about some changes to our budget if you feel like you don't have the money for what you need. Like, I'm willing to go there with you, but the bottom line of the way this is working now, I have a boundary there. And this to me reads, there's gaslighting going on, or there could be gaslighting going on. And it's that again, why I think it's really important when you say no, that you know why you're saying no, not so you can defend it to your partner, but so that you can remain clear internally when it's challenged. Because often our no's are challenged. And sometimes that's not a, I'm challenging your no to throw you off. It's a, help me understand why this is a hard no for you. And it's okay to be able to explain that. It's okay to dive into that. I think that solidifies for us and maybe brings some understanding for a partner as well.
Yeah. And I was thinking, I typed out my boundaries on computer and printed them out. Good for you. So,
yep.
And they're visible for him too. So, and I could, I almost empathize and say, I can understand why having healthy boundaries is causes resentment. You're probably upset with the situation, and I'm, viewed as the enforcer on those, but I need to hold to my integrity. So, but yeah, I mean, to me, that's just the addict going, wham, 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 I want what I want. And you're not letting me do what I want whenever I want. And so, so you get the brunt of it. So, next question. My daughter just brought up that she has a lot of resentments from the past against me. She doesn't live with me anymore after I got a divorce and left the house. Where do I start?
Oh boy. That's big. First of all, knowing nothing about what your relationship with your daughter is like, I'm going to speak in some generalities here. First of all, what I see is a door of opportunity for your child to say, I have some resentments for some things that have happened in the past, and their resentments towards you. Um, I like to read that as an opportunity for some healing and some listening. Um, as I've looked at things that I've wanted to say to my parents, and as I've looked at the concerns that my children have brought to me, I would say in my book, probably 90% of those concerns are things that I don't feel are valid, or I don't feel like should be an issue, but they're real for my child. And so my opportunity as a parent is to show them that I can listen with them, and I can witness with them, and I can understand where they're coming from. Um, so a couple things that I would look at is, first is do I want to engage in this conversation? And if so, why? Why would I want to engage in this? And the second thing is, if I engage in this conversation, what role am I going to take? And I would recommend here is your first role is to be a really good listener. Like, I wouldn't even consider it being a conversation until the safety and listening is established with your child, simply because there's a parent-child dynamic here. So you'd want to make sure, if you said yes to this, that you were in a place where you could listen, you could ask really good follow-up questions, and you could give your child the experience of being heard and understood by you. Now, being heard and understood does not mean agreeing with, and it doesn't have to. It's that space for your concerns are legitimate. Your ability to talk to me about those concerns are legitimate. And there's nobody else that I would want you to talk to those concerns about. You should be able to bring that to me first. So I think checking for those things and seeing if you're ready. And then just be prepared to be a really good listener if you're going to say yes to that. I know that goes, from what I've experienced with people that I've worked with in my own life, it goes a long, long way when somebody is hurt, to feel like they can talk to the person who's hurt them or is wrapped up in that story without that person becoming defensive, without that person needing to change their narrative. That's one of those situations where I would definitely say, instead of listening for facts, which we can always dispute what the facts are, listen for the emotion. What's trying to be communicated there? It may be, I never felt like you had the time for me that I needed from you. It may be, I was really upset when you got divorced, and that turned my whole life upside down, and I'm angry at you for that. It may be, I never felt like you saw me for who I was, and that made me feel so alone. If we get into the what it is that you're feeling rather than the why are you feeling it, there's an opportunity to be right there for a partner, or a child. I've had times where my kids have come to me and they've said, it just feels like you don't care about me. And thankfully, my response to those has been, oh no, if that's the feeling you're getting from me, I'm really missing the mark somewhere. That's the last thing I want you to feel from me. Help me understand what's been going on. And there's a bridge to some repair there. Because I think when it comes to people that we love and we care for, when they don't feel cared for, when they don't feel loved, when they don't feel protected by us, that's usually what's happened, is we've missed something. Or their interpretation of our response has led them to believe that we don't care, and that's valid too. So start with, am I willing to do this? Do I have a reason to say yes to this? And then get ready. Get ready to be a good listener and establish that foundation first. And I would guess that once your child feels like you can listen to them and you can really validate them, they might be open to a discussion around it. They might be open to hearing what was going on for you at this time. What is your life like? What did you experience when you were my age in relation to your parents? Things like that. But oftentimes we want to go to that stuff way too fast, and it ends up feeling dismissing. It ends up feeling like we have an agenda. And if I were in your shoes, my agenda would be to make sure that my child feels safe enough sharing anything with me.
Oh, yeah, I thought same thing. What an opportunity. I mean, rather than her just continuing to harbor the resentments, that she owned that she has them. And I mean, that's, to me, feels like you said, a bridge to, a possibility. But yeah, just, it's easy to want to defend, and it's so much better from my perspective. My daughter just said something when I saw her in June. She said something, it was out of the blue, and it was like, I understand how she got there with the information she had, and I could understand how she had a resentment and had negative feelings about that. So I listened to the whole thing, and after a bit, I was like, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way. There's some other things. Are you open to hearing that? Because I really had to check the waters to see if she was willing to hear some other information. We're in a really good place, most of the time, but I was so grateful she brought that stuff up, because I thought that stuff is hanging there and niggling away at her, and probably, on the fringes of our relationship, even if it doesn't negatively affect the core relationship, there's still some stuff. And so, I was grateful that she was willing to, to bring it up to me, and it was a huge opportunity. And, I think it gave her a different perspective, of the situation. Same thing, kid, divorce, there was stuff. And, with one particular thing, I know for sure I didn't handle it as well as I could have, or optimize the situation. And, that she at least gave me the space to, to apologize truly and deeply for, and understand where the hurt was that she had. But yeah, I think great opportunity. So
yeah, definitely.
Lucky you. I mean, even though it's not fun, but lucky you, because a lot of people just, avoid it and not engage, and you hang on to those resentments. So other questions or comments?
That's where, when you said a lot of people would not engage and hang on to the resentments, that's where I think there's a real opportunity here to say, okay, even if it's ugly, can go on the table, because that keeps flexibility and movement in the relationship. It's a connection, even though it may be a connection around something that neither of you wants to be feeling, or neither of you wants to be part of the relationship. It is part of the relationship. It's my belief that we can connect on any emotion, as long as we are sharing that emotion in a way that other people can connect with.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because I had some memories of things, where I had resentments, as a kid, and as an adult, and re-examining those, have different perspective. But, my parents are humans. I'm a human. I'm making mistakes, and just trying to obviously do the best you can and do the least amount of damage to your children,
right,
along the way. But I also think demonstrating that, I'm human, and, asking for forgiveness. I mean, I do that. And I think that that's important, not that I know everything and I'm so good and, you just need to obey me. I mean, that's just really not it for me, in any relationship. I misstep, sometimes because, I'm off the beam myself, or just because I miss a cue from someone, and they take a look or a phrase that I say in a different way than I intended. So I like to have relationships as attended to as possible. I don't handle having things off track. So to me, it's better to just dig in and, to talk about it whenever possible. So
definitely.
Questions or comments? So I mentioned, and I can't remember if all of you were on at the beginning, but the Old Lady Posse group should be starting next Tuesday morning at 8:30 Pacific time, 11:30 Eastern time zone. Susan Anderson, who's an excellent therapist and has done a lot of work with partners and addicts as well, but she's a really good clinician, and she's agreed to donate her time to the sexandrelationshiphealing.com site. So there are more things coming, and if you haven't already engaged in some of the drop-in groups, I invite you to do so. There's a number of them, and we've added a few, and I've got a few more coming besides the Old Lady. The Old Lady Posse was getting the most requests. It was I had 3 of them again over the weekend, and I'm like, I'm trying. So it's a coming. So, but also we've added some more of the webinars. So on Wednesday mornings at 9:30 Pacific time, we have Kristen Snowden is this week, and then Eddie Caparucci is the third week of the month, and Troy Love is the fourth week of the month. And then Mark Anthony Lord will be starting next month, with that time slot. So those are all filled, and Troy Love does one on attachment. So there's lots of opportunities. And the couples workshop at Seeking Integrity Los Angeles is filled for October, but the November one is starting to take registrations. That is up to 4 couples, working with Paul Hartman. There's also a men's 3-day intensive, a kind of a jump start. If guys need, they either relapse or just need a little getting over the hurdle. But the Seeking Integrity Los Angeles program, the 14-day intensive is excellent. And I really hope you consider that for any males that need help. I don't think there's better help. So, and you can always reach out and ask me if you've got questions on any of that. So, and we've got a question. How can I tell if I don't want to compromise out of fear, habit, or personal safety? Oh, that's an excellent question.
That is a really good question. And I would say there's 2 of the things you listed in there that are good reasons not to, and maybe not to engage in an approach behavior. If there's fear or personal safety going on, the question, asking yourself the question, what's the evidence or what are the reasons why I shouldn't right now? If it's out of fear, you're going to come up with some fear answers. I'm afraid for my safety. I don't feel like being yelled at tonight. If it's personal safety, my partner has a hair trigger and I'm worried this is going to set them off. If it's out of a habit, there's not going to be a really good reason not to. You're going to hear justification. You're going to hear, oh, well, it's not a good time, or I'm sure they know, what I mean or what I need. I think your body really tells the story there. So really tuning into what is it that I'm feeling that has me pausing right now, and then being able to voice that with a safe, supportive person, talk through what's going on. I don't want to, I think talking to an accountability person and saying something like, this issue came up and I don't really want to compromise because I've never compromised before and I don't want to be seen as weak. That would be some of that habit thing. And when we just start, I think when we start just putting words to our feelings without having thought it through, we tend to discover what they're really about. So listen to your body. If fear response comes up, then there's personal safety issues, and that's a good reason to say no. If just kind of I just don't want to, if that comes up, that's probably more habit. Because you'll notice again in the responses when I ask people, what are some good reasons not to compromise? None of these were like, I just don't really feel like it. They were very crystal clear on why we weren't. So I would say that's the first place. That's the first place to go, is what's your body's response to the idea of compromising? Can you come up, are there some real concrete reasons, or are you just out of habit saying, I'm not going to?
I think it's interesting that you categorize that I don't want to be seen as being weak. And I would have put that in fear, because I was thinking, maybe the fear of, being seen as, just giving in all the time. Mm-hmm. But you put it as habit. So, but I was thinking, when you put it down to the body reaction, I probably wouldn't have a body reaction to the fear of being seen as weak, where if it's fear for my personal safety or, fear of violence or something, then I might be more inclined to have a physical reaction to it.
Because at the end of the day, compromise is really not a position of total strength. It's a position of vulnerability, which is needed in relationships. So yeah, there could be some fear, but the kind of fear that I'm talking about that should keep you out of compromise is like that this really won't be safe. Like I will be physically, emotionally, relationally in danger if I proceed. If my ego is going to take some hits, that's a different story. Like egos are resilient, and we can figure out ways to live with an ego that gets some bruising and maybe isn't right all the time. But the other things, it's hard to live with broken bones and when somebody eviscerates you with their words.
Yeah. The old saying, sticks and stones can break my bones, but names don't. And I was like, that's so not true. That's so not true. Yeah. So, any other questions? We have a couple more minutes. So, Otherwise, I guess now next week, let's talk about that, because next week you won't be available. So next week we won't be here, but the week after we will again. So next week, not at this time frame, but thereafter we'll be back. So
Yep. Looking
all
forward
right.
to it.
Well, thank
Thanks,
you as
everybody.
always, John. See you in 2 weeks.
Yep. We'll see ya.
Bye-bye.